And we're back in black. Today we're gonna talk about the monk in Pathfinder. And the monk is a very special class. And I want to preface this also by saying that in this guide, it's going to not be so much of a build guide, but more of a general guide on how to create a monk in general. What things to think about, what are his strengths, what are his weaknesses, and also how this relates to unfair, which is the highest difficulty. And keep in mind that anything that I say that works on unfair, of course, also works on the lower difficulties. So, with that being said, let's talk about the monk. The monk is a class which has received a lot of smack, I think, from the community. If you ever read about the monk, especially if there's people playing the paper version of Pathfinder, they always smack talk him, saying that it's the worst class ever. If you want a challenge, play the monk. This used to be the case, but what has happened with the monk is that the monk has actually gone through a couple of changes, and there's actually two versions of the monk that you could say. So first, there's the monk here. The new monk is what's in Pathfinder called the Unchained Monk, and that's a very much stronger monk than the original monk. The original monk is what is referred to here as traditional monk in this Pathfinder game, and the traditional monk was, yes, horrible. I'm sorry to say, it's very, very horrible. The problem with the traditional monk is that they did not receive base attack bonus 1 for every level, as usually a melee class does, because else they can't hit anything. So the problem with the traditional monk is he can't hit anything, and he has very little HP. He only has a D8 hit die. So it's very, very weak, very fragile, and can't hit anything. That's very problematic, right? Very, very problematic. So instead they created the Unchained Monk, and this is what is called the just monk here. And the Unchained Monk receives a D10 hit die, same as the fighter, but lower than the Barbarian. By the way, I have guides, probably link in the description if you want to check out the other classes. And they also now gain 1 attack bonus for every level, which is crucial if you want to create a melee character. You can't have a melee character without those bonuses because it simply doesn't work. The character doesn't hold together. But the Unchained Monk is very, very strong. So usually when I talk about these classes, I rank them on a level where I think every class in Pathfinder is balanced around the 2 axes, one being utility and one being combat prowess. But in my mind, the monk has a special place in my heart, and I think it's very, 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 very strong. In my opinion, the monk is the strongest melee class, which strongest melee class in the late game and in the very early game. He suffers a little bit in the mid game, which does not have a pet like the Mad Dog, for instance. So he's very, very strong. So I would rank his combat prowess at probably 100%. He's just up there with the fighter. He's just as good as the fighter. He's just as good as the Barbarian in a fight, because he has flurry of blows. And we're gonna check out Flurry of Blows in just a second. But it also has a little bit of utility. Not much, but I would say maybe 10% utility. So this guy is like 110% good. In my opinion, he's very, very strong for unfair. So let's check out... and by the way, if you want to see how to complete the early game with the monk, there's going to be another link in the description where I tell you how to complete the early game on unfair. And I use a monk character as an example because he's very, very strong on level 1. I would say the strongest melee character on level 1 because he receives this ability, Flurry of Blows. This is what kind of, there are 2 abilities which kind of make and break the monk. This is the strongest ability that they receive, in my opinion. At first level, a monk can make a Flurry of Blows as a full attack. When making a Flurry of Blows, the monk make 1 additional attack at his highest base attack bonus. And that's very, very important that it's at the highest base attack bonus. Because if you're playing unfair, then most mobs that you come up with against, even in the early game, has like 22 armor class. And if you want to be able to hit them, you need to have a very, very high modifier to your attack rating. And you can't get that much with any melee class. You can get something like 9 if you have maxed out strength. You're, you know, rushing in, maybe flanking them, doing stuff like that. Maybe you popped some potion or some buff of some sort. Can maybe go up to 10 or 11. But it's very, very difficult. But Flurry of Blows makes it so that you have 2 attacks, and it's much, much easier to be able to roll 22 on a modifier. So let's say you have a +7 modifier and you roll 2 times, than having a +8 modifier or something that can get with another class, but you can only roll 1 time. So having that extra attack is crucial. It's very, very good on unfair. And also the monk, because of how you naturally build him, easily can pick up arrow dodging, which is a very, very useful ability in the early game. The The monk also has one more ability, which makes him very, very strong, and that is, let's see, where is it? The AC bonus. When unarmed and unencumbered, the monk adds his wisdom bonus, if any, to his AC and CMD. CMD, in my opinion, doesn't matter too much on Unfair, but AC is very important. This AC bonus starts off quite low. I mean, if you compare to other classes, if you compare to a fighter, for instance, if a fighter picks up a heavy armor, which is something like armor rating 9, then he's going to outshine the monk immediately on very low level, level 1, level 2, for instance. But the later the game goes, the monk slowly catches up to the fighter. And in the late game, they're going to have about the same AC, but what's so special about the monk that because it's a AC bonus that does not come from armor, what the monk can do is that he can actually use his AC bonus when he's flat-footed, and he can use some of it when he's against touch attacks. So he's much stronger than a fighter. Many of the strongest attacks in the game are touch attacks, and if you can have a very good save against touch attacks, you're in a very, very good spot. So the monk is insanely good early game, is insanely good late game. It's the mid game where the monk suffers the most. Because the problem is that in the early game you won't be able... in the early game flurry blows will carry you, but the later you progress you don't get too much from monk. If you build, completely into monk, you don't gain huge benefits really. There's no big power spikes for you until you get to the mid-late game, somewhere around that. So that's how the monk is balanced, in my opinion. He's a little bit weak in the mid-game, but overall, in my opinion, he's a 100% fighting class. He's a very, very, very good fighting class, and a very good class to dip into. We're gonna talk about that also, because monk is maybe the best class in the game to multi-class with. I would say paladin is another candidate, and actually a paladin monk is very, very feasible and very, very good. A very good alternative. We're going to talk about that also. So what other things do the monk gain? Well, the monk strikes with their fist, and the more you level up in monk, then you're gonna get more unarmed damage. Whereas unarmed strike, you're going to get 1d6 at level 1 to 3, 1d8 at level 4 to 7, 1d10 at level 8 to 11, 2d6 at 12 to 15, 2d8 at level 16 to 19. So if you look at these numbers, this is like the same numbers as a good two-handed weapon. So essentially you don't need any weapons if you go completely into monk. And I would actually recommend that you actually keep to your fists if you're going with a pure monk build. However, there is an argument for just picking up, as I said, one level of monk, and I think that's probably the strongest way to build your monk, is to actually just pick up one level of monk to gain the flurry of blows, and then you can use something like a Kama. You need to use a monk weapon. In my opinion, the best weapon that you can pick up is the Kama, but you can also go with a two-handed weapon. If you, for instance, want to later spec into two-handed fighter, you can do something like a quarterstaff, which is very, very strong. But if you spec completely into monk, then unarmed strike is unrivaled, because it has a lot of benefits. It has the same damage as, or it has better damage even than having a quarterstaff, and also on top of that, you gain the benefit that you can deflect arrows, which you can't do with a quarterstaff, for instance. So that's very good. They also gain evasion and later on improved evasion, which makes it's kind of the same thing as let's see, rogues gain this ability and barbarians gain this ability. It makes them able to, when they pass reflex save, they take no damage instead of half the damage, and that's very, very good, very, very strong. They also gain a key pool, where they gain a couple of abilities. If you remembered, if you played the old monk, then you were kind of locked into a couple of abilities. We're gonna talk about this subclass later on, like Abundant Step and Diamond Body, and stuff like that. But the Unchained Monk can actually choose abilities, which is much stronger, of course. So, in my opinion, there's no reason to... We're gonna talk briefly about Traditional Monk, but in summary, my opinion about Traditional Monk is there's no incentive except for the challenge to go with the Traditional Monk. So, what other things do they get? They get a key strike, which means that their fists are actually going to get better and better to overcome damage resistances. They start off as getting magic, then they get cold and iron silver, they get lawful, and last point they get adamantine. So you can actually use your fists even if your opponents have damage resistances, which makes the monk actually viable. Actually viable late game, because else it would have been very, very difficult to actually do something with it. So he also gains a style strike. Whenever he makes a furrow blows, he can designate one of his unarmed strikes as a style strike. These strikes are decently good. They're how should I say? They're kind of on a little bit worse, I would say, than the Barbarian rage powers, but they're decent. They're decently strong. We're gonna get fast movement, which is 10 plus enhancement to your base speed when you're not wearing armor. So this is very similar to the Barbarian. They get 10 plus, but they can also wear medium armor. But the Monk will not wear any armor. You lose everything. You lose flurry of blows, you lose your AC bonus, so Monk simply does not wear armor. But how you build your Monk, of course, is that you buff up all your stats. So you have something like a 5 plus modifier from a dexterity, because you have like 20 dexterity or something in the late game. And then you have something like 25, 26 wisdom or something, which gives you like 8 more AC from there. And then you have an insane AC modifier because you also have bracers on. You have like a cloak, you have a ring which gives armor, you have something like a amulet which gives natural armor, and then maybe you have someone buffing in your team which gives you armor. And you're gonna have insane armor class. If you're buffed in late game, you can have something like 50, 60 armor class on your monk not wearing armor, which is insane. Absolutely insane. They get Steel Mind. It gives a +2 bonus saving throw against enchantment spells and effects. This is decent on this level. I think enchantment spells are a little bit dangerous at this point. But later on in the game, what you're going to be worried out, especially in Unfair, are going to be your fortitude and will save. But the monk is very good, because the monk can actually pick up a lot of feats like improved iron will and improved fortitude, and also going to have a lot of strength and constitution, so they're going to have a decent fortitude save in the first place. So they're actually quite good in late game, because in late game all you have to worry about is death magic. Death magic usually targets your fortitude or your will save, or both of them, and if you fail a save in Unfair, you're going to die. Straight out die. No matter how much you spec into constitution, no matter if you go into dragon form and buff everything up, you're not gonna have enough to survive something like a Whale of the Banshee, which deals like 400 damage on Unfair, because all the damage, remember, is doubled, and there's a couple of critical strikes which can probably hit you for, I don't know, 500, 600, something like that. So you won't survive the hardest of hits on that difficulty, unless you can make all the saves. So that's why you need to have very, very good saves if you're a melee class. This does not apply if you're a ranged class. You can just stay out of combat, and you can try not to get hit, and that's another way of... You don't have to have good defenses, you can just stay far away enough to not be hit by anything. But the monk needs to be in it. He needs to be in battle, and the monk's role should be... Traditionally it has been to take out weaker targets, things which does not have good armor, things which does not have good damage resistances, such as mages and rogues. You can pick up a ability from their key pool, which gives you the ability to teleport to a position, and you can just teleport in next to a spellcaster or something, and just go flurry blows, flurry blows, flurry blows, and then just box him down to the ground, or something like that. But I think that with the monk, and there's a couple of abilities that you can go into, you can, especially there's one ability which makes all your unarmed strike go together into one strike, so all the damage, for the sake of damage reduction calculations, it calculates all damages that you do in one round as one strike. So in my opinion, there's nothing they can't really deal with. And they also have these things called the key strike. So in my opinion, that's not really true that they always need to go for mages and need to go for rogues and stuff like that. They can pretty much deal with anything. They can even deal with things in heavy armor, because they're gonna deal so much damage. If you spec a lot into strength, and if you buff up your strength, if you maybe have power strike and stuff like that, you're gonna have enough damage with this guy, honestly. You're gonna have enough damage, and when you also combine your strikes, you're gonna have enough damage to deal even with armor targets. So, that's my rant about the regular monk. Now we're gonna have a look at the subclasses here. So the regular monk is based on wisdom. Then we go to the scaled fist. The scaled fist is very, very similar to this monk. The most major difference is actually that this guy is based on charisma. So this is one of the best subclasses to pick if you want to go into something like a monk paladin, which is something I would very much recommend. Why would I recommend that? Why is that so good? Well, the scaled fist is based on charisma, which means that you can have a very high charisma modifier. You get that charisma modifier to AC. If you also spec into paladin, then you also get that AC bonus or that charisma bonus to your saves, to your will saves, to your fortitude saves, to your reflex saves, to all your saves with the paladin. So if you pick up 2 levels of paladin and 1 level of monk, and your character is already very, very strong, and going into the late game, you don't lose anything out. Even if you go into fighter after that, that's very, very strong. Just having picked up 3 levels in the early game, which makes your character very solid. And also all these levels have base attack bonus. You receive base attack bonus from them, so you don't really lose out on anything. And then you can spec into fighter. I guess the only thing that you lose out on is that on level, you don't get the level 20 feet because you won't be able to get there. But except for that, it's very, very strong. So the scaled fist also gain some scaled fist bonus feats that they can use. They gain draconic metal, 2+ bonus saving throw against all of fear and paralysis effects, and immunity to all diseases. I think the regular monk also get this. So, but the biggest difference that to keep in mind with scaled fist is that he's based on your charisma, so it goes very well with the paladin, for instance. Then we're going to the Sensei, and the Sensei is weird. Weird to say the least. I don't really like this class. It's kind of a bard monk mixture, but the problem for me with this class is that why don't you just go a bard? If you want to be a bard, be a bard. The problem with this guy is that he loses the strongest ability that a monk has. He loses Flurry of Blows instead against Advice, which is something that can inspire courage. So he can basically perform the same inspire courage tune as the bard can, but he can also fight a little bit. But in my opinion, if you're going with something like this, unless you're role-playing this, of course, you can do anything in this game. But if you have Unfair in mind, then I think a pure bard is just simply better. In my mind, the Sensei doesn't really work out. Last class, as I talked about earlier, I already smack-talked this class. And if you want a challenge, yes, the traditional monk is quite horrible. Yes, there's a lot of problems. I don't know exactly why this guy even gets 1 attack bonus on this level. In the pen and paper version, he does not gain it, and he has a very, very bad progression with his attack bonus. He's also locked in with his key pool or key powers. He can't choose them. He has these, which are good, though. To be fair, it's very good to have Abundant Step and a Diamond Body, which gives immunity to poisons. There's not too many poisons, to be fair, though. He also gains Diamond Soul, resistance equal to his monk level, plus 10 to spells, which is good. It's a good power. And monk can set up vibrations within the body to be fatal if he desires. One must make a fortitude save or die. I'm pretty sure that this is also death magic, so if your opponent has immunity to death magic, it won't work. This is pretty much the same for all classes. There's a few kill abilities, but they're all regarded as death magic, and the most late game mobs have immunity to death magic anyway, so it won't work against most things, but it will work against some weak things. We can use the key power Quivering Pain. So I'm not gonna spend too much on the traditional monk. It's weaker than the other classes. I don't know exactly. I think it's there more for legacy purposes, for people who have some nostalgia for the old monks when they used to be horrible. Let's go into creating a monk and let's have a look at the stats and what's very good. So here I've selected a Tiefling. I would very much recommend going with a Tiefling if you're going with a monk, because the Tiefling has a heritage called the Motherless. What the Motherless gain is they get +2 racial bonus to strength and to wisdom, which are the things we need. We need strength and we need wisdom. They get a -2 penalty to intelligence, which we don't care about. They get the blur spell, which means you can cast a spell on yourself, which makes you have concealment 20%, so you're harder to hit in combat. And they also gain a secondary bite attack. This means that you will start off with 3 attacks. You'll have 2 flare blows attack, and you will have 1 bite attack on level 1. That's very, very strong. So that's something I would recommend. If you want to see this in action, then check out the link in the description where I did the entire early game on Unfair with a melee class, with a monk specifically. So we're gonna select the modulus. And here what's most important in the early game is that you need to have your +5 modifier to strength, because if you don't have that +5 modifier to strength, it's going to be so difficult to hit anything that you will have to reload. That's it. I mean, in Unfair, anything works in Unfair if you're prepared to reload a lot. And you probably don't want to do that, so you want to minimize the amount of reloads that you have to do. We don't need intelligence, so we can remove that. We don't need charisma, so we can remove that. And then it's kind of up to you how you want to spend this. Keep in mind though that it's always better to go with more wisdom than to go with dexterity, because your wisdom modifies your will save. It gives you AC, so it's the same as dexterity. Yeah, but it's also connected to your will save. And then you need some constitution. You have to make up yourself how much you want to spend on these. But keep in mind also that later on in the game, as the game progresses, you're gonna get a lot of bonus stats here. You're gonna have maybe +5 or +6 to dexterity. You're gonna have maybe +6 to your wisdom or something. And as you level up, you can just either dump into wisdom or dump into strength, or do a mix between them, because those are the strongest stats in my opinion. If this is your main character, I always recommend that you go persuasion, because there's a couple of checks that you can pass, and if you pass them with persuasion, then we get a lot of experience. Also, it's very difficult to pass these checks. I don't know if that's specifically in Unfair or if that's true for all other difficulties, but in Unfair, I did not pass many of these checks up here, even though I spent a point, you know, every level into them. I think you need to go with something like a bard or someone who's specifically a skill monkey if you actually want to pass these tests on Unfair. So what I would recommend is persuasion, or if this is not your main character, you can go into use magic device. Use magic device will make you able to use scrolls, and that can be quite useful, especially depending on your party composition. If you don't have a cleric, for instance, you definitely need someone who can cast rejuvenation on your party. So I'm gonna assume that this is not your main character. Also, this is a mercenary, so he will have a little bit lower stats than your main character. If you have more points to spare, then you can go into more constitution, you can go into more wisdom, or you can go into more dexterity. That's up to you. The most important part is that you have 20 strength, because else you won't be able to hit anything in the early game. And then we'll continue on here. Then we're gonna go into abilities. And if you want to be a pure monk, then what I would recommend is that you go weapon focus, and here there's actually a weapon focused unarmed strike. Funnily enough, you can focus in that. And then I would definitely recommend that you pick up Deflect Arrows. Deflect Arrows, I don't have Dexterity 13, but I can pick it up anyways because I'm a monk. You must have at least one hand free, holding nothing, to use this feat. Once per round, when you would normally be hit with an attack from a ranged weapon, you may deflect it so that you take no damage from it. If you've seen my video on how to complete the early game with a melee character, you will see how crucial and how super good this is in a normal fight against humans, which have a lot of bows and arbalests and stuff like that. So Deflect Arrows I would highly recommend. And then what I would recommend, you can go lawful evil, you can go lawful neutral, lawful good. What I would recommend is lawful good, especially if you're going scaled fist, because if you're going scaled fist, now I didn't pick scaled fist with this character. If you had picked scaled fist, then instead of wisdom you go charisma, but lawful good has the advantage that you can also sidestep a little bit into paladin, go 2 levels there, and as I said, gain the charisma bonus then on your saves. So that's pretty much my guide to the monk. It's a very strong class, as I said. It shines in the early game, it shines in the late game, it has a little bit of utility with some spells and things which can make you, for instance, they have the dimensional door, which can make them jump into special places. There's not too much of that you need to do in this game, but there is one place in particular which you're gonna get to where it's very good to be able to teleport, and it's nice to have that on one of your characters. So it has a little bit of utility. I would call it 10% utility, 100% combat prowess, because it's actually very strong. If you go with the normal monk, it's very strong in melee. So that's my guide. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.